What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg, back on camera, feeling good and looking good, if you don't mind me saying. Got the Waverly with me so that we can, you're such a sweet baby, so that we can talk about the top 20 sleepers in Theros Beyond Death.
Scooper, I'm just trying to take my life like a Koopa Trooper. I'm Double Mario, that mean I'm super, and I'm freaking dangerous like a Chupa Cabre. Got them all day like a Kanye, but I'm way better getting cheddar in Monterey. But Jack, you don't know, man, you got the show, man. You want roast beef? Well, I'm Arby's.
And we're back. Now, what is a sleeper? I always have to answer that question because there's always like 5 people that don't have never seen my videos. So what is a sleeper? Well, obviously the hype train for Theros is really coming down the tracks at top speed right now. I mean, this is one of the more anticipated sets in a good long time because we're just about all done with Throne of Eldraine Standard. Thank you very much. So we want some new life to get infused into this set, and there are a bunch of cards that we're paying a lot of attention to. But as usual, there are a bunch of cards that we're not paying enough attention to. So today, we're going to highlight those. All right, so now that we got the definitions out of the way, let me go ahead and jump into it. After a quick call to action, I got to do all the parts of my job, even the ones that I don't particularly like. So make sure that you like the video if you got the time to hit one button input. That would really help me out, put me in more recommended feeds. You can also sub to the channel, hit the bell for the notifications, all the stuff YouTubers tell you to do, and hit up the Patreon if you want to support content like this, because literally every YouTuber just underwent a massive pay cut now that COPPA is a thing. So if you want to support your favorite creators and keep them on YouTube making content, then check out Patreons for everybody, but especially me. So yeah. Aside from that, I guess let's go ahead and get into it with the honorable mention, Sweet Oblivion. First of all, Oblivion was very sweet. It's one of my favorite Elder Scrolls joints, but as far as the piece of cardboard you're looking at, or I guess it's digital, it'll be cardboard in real life, I promise. But anyway, this looks pretty sweet for like blue mill players, right? I mean, just on its face, that's one use for it. And I think mill players will kind of like this, but it doesn't propel mill into the top tiers of standard or anything. What I'm more worried about when it comes to this card, and what I think is most dangerous about it, is the ability to mill yourself. There's just a lot more uses to this card than it looks like at first glance, so I wanted to point it out. Let's talk about number 20 here, which is Mtg's Prophecy. Now, my prophecy is that this card is going to see more play than you might think, because this is effectively 2 mana for scry 2 and draw 2. It's fantastic. Even if you get your spell counter, the one that you named in Chapter 2, you still draw the 2 cards, because it doesn't require that you actually resolve the spell that you named. There's really not much people can do about it if they don't have some kind of discard effect that pinpoints a specific card. So as long as you can survive until the point in the game where you're casting the card you named, you're just drawing 2 effectively free cards on the turn that you cast the spell, which is really freaking nice. And imagine if you name a card that's relatively cheap in the first place. So I'll name Opt. Then I'll cast Opt on that turn, draw 2 cards, and I've effectively paid 1 mana to draw 3. Isn't that Ancestral Recall? I'm pretty sure it is. So I think Mtg's Prophecy might actually be really, really cool. Even if you only ever really get to scry off of it, that's not a bad ETB trigger right there. But obviously there's more cards to talk about. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to number 19, which is Lampad of Death's Vigil. Just like Mtg's Prophecy, this is a card that I can't stop thinking about. I'm not sure that it's great or anything, but at the same time, it keeps creeping into my mind because it's not terrible. I've said a million times over the last few months that we actually hit a million times, that we need a decent black 2-drop. And we saw a number of them that we could use in Theros Beyond Death that I think are probably more useful than this, at least in a vacuum. But in your basic Aristocrats deck, this is not only a Blood Artist of sorts, but it's also a Sacrifice Engine. And honestly, Blood Artist and Sacrifice Engine on the same card it seems really good. It seems fantastic to me. Plus, obviously, if it's getting late on into the game and you need a little bit of reach, you got 4 or 5 open mana, just sacrifice a bunch of creatures. Lampad included, by the way, it can sacrifice itself, and just deal that last, 3, 4, 5 damage to the opponent that you need to win the game. That might actually come in handy really well. Plus, there's Corvald, Mayhem Devil, which effectively doubles the damage this is doing when you do sacrifice stuff. There's just all kinds of ways that you could abuse this card, and honestly, 1 mana to sacrifice a thing, even though it's not free, is still a decent rate. So Lampad actually looks a lot better to me than it does to the majority of the community, which has more or less forgotten it after it got spoiled. And I think that might be a serious mistake. This does look to produce a fair amount of value and even some late game reach in those aristocrats decks. So this is more of a lion than a Lampad. That's the worst pun in the entire video. Number 18 is Dream Shaper Shaman, which maybe should be in the top 10. As far as what we're talking about sleepers, right? You'd think that this thing looks really, really powerful, but it's all the way down here at number 18 because I don't know that there are that many ways to really take advantage of the power level of this card. It is far from a key piece like, say, Goblin Charbelcher or something, although it is somewhat similar in function to the Goblin Charbelcher deck, if not also the card. But in any case, this looks like it could be some use, but you have to pay 9 mana to use it the turn it comes out. Even 6 mana and then 3 mana on the next turn is a bit much to ask, especially considering this thing has an enormous target on its back in the meantime. But if you can ever pull it off, there's probably a litany of ridiculous garbage that you can do with this stupid thing, especially considering it does allow you to play other non-permanent cards. Right? This goes with Ironcrag Feet pretty well if you want to get it onto the table really fast, and for that matter, activate it relatively fast. It's also kind of a sacrifice engine, so that might end up mattering here or there, although, again, I highly doubt it. But just the ability to effectively play nothing but this and one other non-land permanent and go tutor up that non-land permanent, just slam it on the battlefield, whether it's, Omniscience or some other giant really expensive permanent. It could work, but again, the initial investment is a little bit scary, but I could definitely see decks that pull it together just by using a lot of fast mana effects to make sure that you can hit Dream Shaper as quickly as possible. Well, let's move on here to number 17, which is Devourer of Memory. I have a problem saying devourer. That's tough, but in any case. Sweet little card right here that, again, I don't think enough attention is being paid to, because it does look relatively low in power level compared to some of the other creatures, especially 2-drop creatures that are in the format right now. But I just got to remind you exactly how many cards were printed in Theros Beyond Death that put stuff into your graveyard. It's way too many to put on screen right now because it feels like every third card puts cards into your graveyard, and it's not like we didn't already have a bunch of cards that do that. So this might actually be way better than we think it is. Number 16 is Arasta of the Endless Web. And Arasta is in kind of arrested development right now because we're not really sure if there's going to be a deck in Standard that this hoses sufficiently. But this is kind of the very definition of a sleeper, a card that's waiting on the proper format to actually see some amount of play. But I'm just talking about Standard in that example. This could actually see play in some other formats. I'm not saying it's these Modern play day one, because Storm is that even a deck anymore? But if Storm was a deck, this might see some play, but I'm not sure you're getting it on the battlefield before they storm off. So who knows? But I guess the biggest point of praise I could give this card is that it actually looks like a pretty dope commander. All things considered, I have been one of the throng of the chorus that has asked for a spider commander more than once. Now, we've gotten commanders who are spiders, but not too many that actually work synergistically, is that the right word? Synergetically? With spiders. And this actually kind of does. It cranks out spiders for you. And if you're in a 4 to 8 person commander game, then it's pretty likely that you're going to be able to make a spider or 2 or 3 every turn cycle with this fairly easily. So it might be a good enough commander that it belongs on one list or another, so I've decided to throw it on the sleepers list for now. I think this is a dope card, but I don't necessarily like cards that, rely on what your opponent is doing, and there are going to be whole decks this doesn't really do anything against in the upcoming Standard. But then again, it might be waiting on exactly the right deck to pounce. Number 15 is Protain Thaumaturge. I had so many people tell me in the comment section, dude, I love you, but it's Thaumaturge. It's not Thaumaturge. Now, you'd think I may have thawed on this card in the last few days, but no, I'm hotter than ever on it. This card actually looks really sweet to me, especially in a format full of enchantments and stuff that you want to copy too. This can copy Setessan Champion. This can copy, say, Nightmare Shepherd, which might actually be just disgusting. So there's too many really, really sweet things for this to copy. And keep in mind, if you play an enchantment creature like Nightmare Shepherd, this can go ahead and immediately copy that creature, which could come in handy an awful lot. And by the way, I haven't even mentioned yet that this can copy your opponent's creatures. So if your opponent drops a Lovestruck Beast or Rotting Regisaur or some other nonsense permanent, then just you can have one too, which is pretty sweet. So I think the card might actually see some amount of play depending on what happens, but I'm still kind of holding my breath. And number 14 is a card that I really had to stop myself from making like number 1. I really wanted this to be like in the top 10, but in the end, I've tried to be objective and sort of, not just assume that everything I think is correct. So I know it sounds crazy. So Storm Herald. Storm Herald is the card I'm referring to. This actually looks kind of repulsive and even a little bit dangerous if you have the deck that wants it, right? I mean, pretty obviously the best way to exploit this is just to have a deck that puts a bunch of cards into your yard, and then you can reanimate Storm Herald, and with it along will come all of the auras that you've put into your yard over the course of that game. The only problem is it's going to be kind of tough to figure out a deck that can balance putting cards in your yard and reanimating stuff and have auras in it. I mean, it seems like kind of a tall order, but you put your Bruin hat on and you might be able to make this work. And there's a bunch of really good auras, y'all. Like Mantle of the Wolf looks really cool with this. Even things like Angelic Gift will give it flying, so it's more likely to actually hit when it has the haste for the attack step. And you draw a card when Angelic Gift comes into play, so that's pretty good. Right then and there, if you want some card draw off of your combo, you got it. Plus, there's all kinds of stuff. Staggering Insight could go really well on a Storm Herald from the graveyard. Now, you only get these auras for one turn, so you really want to smash in and end the game right there, but it's entirely possible with the amount of auras and the kind of auras that we have in this format right now that you can make that a reality. It just seems like more of a dank jank deck than an actual like top tier deck, but I guess time will tell. This is a really exciting card that's honestly kind of pushed in some ways. It didn't have to have haste. It didn't have to have when it enters the battlefield. It could say when it entered the battlefield, if you cast it from your hand, do this. But it doesn't even say that. It's just an ETB trigger. So I think that Wizards has worded this card in such a way that we can exploit it pretty easily. We just got to have the right pieces. Number 13 is another card that I kind of have to stop myself from putting in the top 5. But honestly, again, I'm trying to kind of check myself before I colloquially, proverbially wreck myself here. So let's go ahead and talk about Dalekos. Right here, Dalekos. I like to call him Salvador Dalikos because that's the actual worst pun in the video. Because the deck you're going to build with this thing might actually end up being a work of art. There, I got there to the actual joke. Anyway, just imagine the stuff this can do just in Standard. I mean, I know that Standard doesn't look like a very equipment-rich format, but this is in the same colors as Embercleave, and I want a flying haste trample double strike guy. That seems more than good. I was just gonna say good. That seems pretty gross. But there's also the fact that we just saw Shadow Spear in this set, and Shadow Spear looks like maybe the actual best equipment they printed in a really long time. And along with Dalekos, you're giving your creature what? Trample, lifelink, flying, and haste. That seems good. It seems very good. Plus, you've got, Renowned Weaponsmith in the format, too, to kind of go along with Dalekos. And with those two in play, you can cast, huge artifacts. So this might be a sleeper in that we have to wait for more good equipment, or maybe just more really high-cost artifacts to hit the table or hit the format before we can actually play this card. But in the meantime, just this with Shadow Spear or Embercleave seems repulsive enough. So we're going to give it a try. Number 12 is Dawn of Evangel. I am way too excited for this. I mean, you may have noticed it's above Storm Herald and Dalekos. That's how excited I am for it. I like that it's one of the mini cards in Theros Beyond Death that the design team used to sort of, kind of get around why auras are bad in the first place. If you have a 2-drop that has auras on it and it dies, you can just get it right back from the yard. Seems good. Again, you're keeping yourself from being 2-for-1 in the case that your creature with an aura on it dies. Plus, there are just all kinds of combos with this stupid thing already. I've already talked about them in the preview video, but obviously this goes pretty well in the commander format with Rancor. That seems pretty dumb, but there's all kinds of silly combos with this. Plus, it works with Dead Weight and Mire's Grasp and Inevitable End and all of these, removal auras, basically. And that might be pretty sweet too. You know, imagine Myers grasping your opponent's creature to death and getting a creature from your yard back, like a Cruel Celebrant or a Corpse Knight or something. It all seems pretty hot to me. But here we are at number 11, almost halfway through the list. What is the top 10 honorable mention? Well, it's Relentless Pursuit this time around. You know, just like a couple of other cards I've already talked about in this video, I just can't get my mind off of this card. It's really interesting to me, and although it's possible to whiff, I don't think it's very likely. I mean, if you've got like 24 to 26 creatures and then like 24 to 26 lands, it's like above 90% that you're going to hit on this, you know, both creature or both permanent types. So I just don't think whiffing is a huge problem. And it's effectively like a green divination, you know, a 3-mana draw 2 in green is it's very good. I mean, green doesn't get access to effects like this every day. And it puts the other 2 cards in the yard, which is obviously not bad. I mean, if it was just put the other cards on the bottom of your library in a random order or something, I probably wouldn't pay anywhere near as much attention to this card. But if you can get the full value out of it in the form of getting 2 cards off of it and also bidding 2 important cards, and I think this card might actually see a fair amount of play because it's kind of like a green draw 4 in some situations, and that's not bad. It's certainly not bad. Number 10 is Nadir Kraken, and you might think I'm smoking Kraken putting this card on the sleepers list at all. There are a fair amount of players who are really paying attention to Kraken and really want to do some cool stuff, but for the most part, a lot of competitive players do not have their eye on Kraken, and I think that might be a serious mistake. There's all kinds of cool things you can do with this. It's going to effectively grow every turn if you want it to. If you have the mana to invest in your draw step, this will grow every single turn without fail, so that's kind of good enough right there. But in a format where we have cards like, say, Opt, the card gets much, much better. I mean, imagine how difficult it is to attack into a Kraken when that opponent has open mana. You know, they might Opt when you swing in and make their Kraken bigger and get a 1/1 to block with. They might Thrill of Possibility, make their Kraken way bigger and get 2 1/1s to block with. Or just develop their board state so they can hit you with the Crackback on the next turn. The Kraken back on the next turn, you know. And by the way, during their draw step on that next turn, their Kraken will get even bigger. So, I mean, just the notion of swinging into this kind of gives me cold sweats. So I just think this is a kind of a dangerous card. And there's all kinds of ways to exploit it. I mean, I've already talked about Opt, Thrill of Possibility. Those are some cheap ways to do it. But if you have a lot of mana, like, say, 6 mana, you can Chemister's Insight on your opponent's turn. Make your Kraken +2/+2 bigger in the form of counters, no less, and get 2 more guys. And if you have 6 mana on your turn, you can Treacherous Blessing. And suddenly your Kraken gets 3 counters and you get 3 Krakens. Come on. 3 tentacles, I guess. Come on. That seems so good. It just seems like the Kraken is a card that can go from innocuous to super freaking dangerous over the course of like 1 turn. And it just takes over the game. So I think that the competitive players who are kind of looking at Kraken as a joke might want to reevaluate, especially if Mono Blue Devotion even wants to be a deck at all. This is probably your 3-drop. There we are, number 9. It's Actress. I am amazed by the amount of people who don't think that this is a good Magic card. Honestly. I mean, 4 mana for draw 2. Like, if it was just, okay. So it was just a 4 mana, 3/2 menace that came into play, you draw 2 cards. Great card. Excellent card. Guaranteed. People would be like, oh, that's a good card. You draw 2. Holy crap. But instead, considering you get like a mini factor fiction thing, people are just like, it seems to me, at least, in my experience, people have been very cold on this, and I just do not get it. A body with at least reasonable stats and an evasive keyword. They didn't have to put an evasive keyword on it. They did anyway. But just a body with decent stats that can trade pretty consistently and attacks fairly well, considering, again, the keyword. That also, like, almost always draws you 2 cards, if not 1 really good card. It's crazy. Like, I feel like a lot of people's evaluation center is just slightly off when it comes to this card, but not that many other cards from Theros. I just really don't get the amount of meh that I've heard in response to this card being spoiled, because even though I don't know what deck it goes in day 1 or anything, I still think that effectively drawing 2 cards when your 3/2 comes into play is a deal that's very hard to refuse. But speaking of drawing cards, let's look at number 8. It's Allure of the Unknown. This thing puts a bunch of cards in your hand. This thing puts 5 cards into your hand, ladies and gentlemen, sir or madam. That's a lot of cards. It's a lot of mana, but it's also a lot of cards. And the fact that it gives your opponent 1 card, technically the best card, is really putting a lot of people off on this. But at the same time, imagine like a Jund Fires deck, or even a Rakdos Fires deck, that has access to this crazy, stupid piece. Casting this as your first free spell on a Fires of Invention turn allows you to just take the other best card that you got in that batch and immediately cast it. One of the worst parts of this card is that you're paying 5 mana for it, and very often your opponent's going to use your best card before you get a chance to use the other 5 cards that you drew, but not in Fires, and that might be what makes this card playable. But all in all, 5 mana for 5 cards in your hand is a ridiculous deal, even if your opponent gets one. Now, number 7 is Phoenix of Ashe. Now, this was Ashe Phoenix. That was the translation forever, and I think Ashe Phoenix is better than Phoenix of Ashe, especially considering one way or the other, people are going to call it either Phoenix of Ass or Ass Phoenix. I mean, you're asking for it, but I don't think this Phoenix is ass. He just got done with a problem Phoenix in Ixalan Standard. That thing rotated out. Here comes another stupid Phoenix rising from the ashes of the problematic card pool. I actually think this is way better than a lot of people are judging it right now, because there's mostly been like ho-hum reactions to this card, and I don't get it. This thing comes back over and over and is not hard to actually make come back, for that matter. When it does come back, it comes back bigger. It's a flying haste thing. I mean, there's just all kinds of reasons to want to play this in a mono red deck, and it might in and of itself make decks like mono red Phoenix actually kind of viable. So, and I mean Arclight Phoenix. When I say Phoenix, that was confusing, but anyway, this might make certain decks viable all by itself, and it might be pretty decent in just the mono red aggro decks that don't play Cavalcade of Calamity. And yes, there are some. But in any case, I just think the card on power level alone in a vacuum is hot enough, pun intended, hot enough to make me want to at least play with it, lab with it, try it out, see how it does. But again, I'm surprised that more players aren't having that reaction, because the card looks very good to me. Number 6 is Tectonic Giant, and this is another one you might think is weird for being on the sleepers list, because this is one that a lot of competitive players are into the idea of, but I don't think that beyond the competitive realm, this card has really seen that much attention, because it doesn't look like much upon first read, but this is actually a pretty gross card. You could also say that it deserves to be a sleeper because it's like under $1 right now, as are just about every card on the list is under $1. And I don't understand why this one is. When I looked at the price of this one, I assumed it was going to be like, I don't know, $2.50, $3, maybe even $5, because a lot of competitive players are game planning with this card. They want to know how good it is and all that. They're labbing with it at the moment. There's a bunch of other decks this card could effectively go in, because it's almost always, the way it's worded, going to get you some amount of card advantage, or at the very least a bolt before it dies. If your opponent lets it survive to where it can actually, not be affected by summoning sickness anymore, to where it can actually attack, then you're guaranteed to get value off of it. But if they kill it with a removal spell, you're also guaranteed to get value off of it. So I just think the card is really, really strong, and I haven't even talked about Naya Giants yet. Jeez. Just another ridiculous giant for the Realm Cloak Giant deck. So there's all kinds of things this slots into on day one, and I think it's probably going to see a fair amount of play. Pay attention to it. Now, my number 5 is yet another card that I really have the compulsion to make number 1. I really do, but not every card can be number 1. Maybe that should have been the joke. Maybe I should have just uploaded like top 1 sleeper of Theros Beyond Death, but it's actually like 15 or 20 cards. That would have been a good joke. Memes for days, but in any case, I think that Lamia is not so lame. Mia. That almost worked. Anyway, is Gravebreaker grave broken? Maybe not, but maybe so, right? I mean, effectively, this is just a tutor. It casts Entomb when it enters the battlefield, and for 5 mana, that is an awful lot, but at least you get a 4/4 life-linking body, and you get to play Entomb in Standard, which might be good enough, right? I mean, it seems like a fairly sick card to me, especially considering even if you never actually get value out of your graveyard, you still got a pretty decent life-linking body that's going to brick wall aggro and stuff. But obviously this makes escape costs less. This makes all kinds of graveyard costs less, like flashback. This will make costs less if you can get it out. But obviously, if you want to get it out without paying 5 mana, you can always reanimate this. and then use the ETB trigger, and then reanimate something else later. So there's all kinds of reasons I want to play this card right now. If you search Gravebreaker Lamia combo on Google, at least this has been my experience, you only really get one deck, and it's like a deck playing this with Archon of Falling Stars. I'm not really sure what it's doing. That's probably not the best deck, but there's going to be a bunch of decks in time, trust me, that use this card for some kind of broken advantage or another. Plus, if nothing else, pretty sweet commander playable, right? I think it is. I think it's probably really commander playable, but does it have a home in standard? Time will tell, but I think that it probably will eventually. Now, my number 4 is an uncommon that I really kind of gave a bad rap to during preview season, and I want to fix that because number 4 is Anax. This card is actually maybe kind of good. I didn't love it when I first read it, and I still have some issues with it, namely that if one of your creatures dies and you get a 1/1, you didn't actually put more power and toughness on the battlefield, right? Because, first of all, maybe the creature that died was a 3/3, you're just putting a 1/1 on the battlefield. But also, Anax probably lost a point of power when a creature died, but it doesn't gain that point of power back when you get the token. So, like, there's some problems with the card, don't get me wrong, but what it is really good wrath protection, if nothing else. And I missed this the first time I read the card. It replaces itself when it dies too. So it's kind of a mega Doom Traveler or something, you know? Like, whenever it dies, you'll at least get a token out of it. And I think it's really cool for Cavalcade decks. Even though this will never actually trigger Cavalcade when it attacks, there's still plenty of reasons to play it in Cavalcade decks. Usually those decks are on Torbrand, so if you've got Anax into Torbrand, Anax has 5 power and pretty much has to be blocked in that situation, which means your opponent probably isn't going to be as able to block the 1/1 Scorch Spitters and stuff like that they really want to block so that they can't ever attack again. Keep that in mind. I think that's kind of neat, but this will also, let's say your opponent does wrath your board, full of Scorch Spitters and 10th Street Dodgers and Ginger Brutes and Fervent Champions and whatever. You still get a bunch of 1/1s that can attack the next turn and trigger Cavalcade. So this plays through sweepers really, really well and even replaces itself when it dies. And I think I gave the card a poor evaluation the first time I read it. Again, I want to fix that now. I think Anax is a very good card, and more so than people are giving it credit for, including myself, I guess. Now, number 3 is a card I have done a lot of thinking about since we originally saw it pretty early on into Theros Beyond Death spoiler season. Number 3, we're the top 3, holy crap. Number 3 is the Achroan War. Now, honestly, disregard the other 2 chapters on this. Chapter 2 and 3, they exist, and they're very good in certain game states, but it's really the first chapter that I'm most enamored with here. It steals a creature for 2 full turns. That's great. I mean, this Control Magic is a card they'll never ever reprint just because it's so annoying and so problematic and so hard to deal with. And, I mean, it doesn't matter how awesome your creatures are. Your opponent will just take them, right? Well, they've effectively reprinted Control Magic here at an easier to cast cost. It only has 1 colored symbol in the mana cost. And I think that ultimately this might end up being a bit of a mistake. Yeah, it doesn't really do much against decks that don't play creatures, but like, ooh, against decks that do play creatures, this steals their best creature for 2 turns. That's really very good in my estimation, at least. And it's even better a lot of times on the draw. Not a whole lot of cards that are better on the draw, but on the draw this will steal their Questing Beast or something, or their Pelucranos for 2 turns. Who doesn't want that? So, like, I actually think this card is kind of sick, like really disgusting, just because of that first ability, being able to active treason something for 2 turns instead of just 1. Huge game, especially if you happen to have like a Witch's Oven or some other thing you can sacrifice their creature to. That's all gravy, but when it comes to the other 2 chapters, not half bad, honestly. You've got their biggest, baddest creature that they have to swing into, so you could really effectively say chapter 2 is a form of removal or something, so long as you don't die to their attack step. And by the way, if you're gonna die to their attack step, they're gonna attack with all their creatures anyway, regardless of whether you have this saga out, right? So just keep that in mind. I mean, I think that this saga, the second chapter, is nothing but good in most situations. If they can kill you, they're going to attack you anyway, right? So you're just throwing them off guard and making them attack into their biggest creature. And by the way, if you did steal a Questing Beast, you got to attack with it, but it's still up to block when you get to chapter 2 of this, which is really nice. And then on chapter 3, it's a Red Wrath. Like, come on! Like, not only does it steal a creature, but it wraths everything. That's nuts. Like, it's a one-sided wrath too. I don't know why. Like, when we all saw this card the first time, we weren't like, oh, because honestly, the more I look at it, the more I'm like, oh, it's a sick, disgusting, repulsive Magic card. But man, I just realized the top 3 is like all 4 drops. So let's move on to Archon of whatever it's called, Sun's Grace, ASG. But I've already made this joke, but if you rearrange the letters, this card is in fact gas. It's just this too just makes me think it might be like slightly mistakey, but considering it does cost 4 mana, it's probably not too dire of a card to print, honestly. And it doesn't really get you any kind of advantage when you first play it. You know, the card looks fair in a vacuum, but if you ever untap with it, or let's say you have 5 mana and you cast this and then a 1 mana aura, that's just crazy value. That is such good value. You get 2 life-linking bodies in the air that total up to 5 power, which is good enough. But, you know, you cast another enchantment, that's 7 life-linking power in the air. Another enchantment, 9 life-linking power in the air. And I just don't think it's going to be that hard to actually pull off play sequences where you go like Archon on turn 4, and then turn 5 you play like 2 or even 3 low-cost enchantments. Just fill the board with either blockers or attackers that are going to end the game one way or the other. Against aggro decks, this is a ridiculous brick wall that once you get it down, it blocks well enough by itself. But again, if you ever start actually putting Pegasi out with it, then you're just going to get, you know, 5, 7, 9 lifelink damage in every turn. And there's no way that aggro decks can hold up to that kind of onslaught. So I don't know what deck it goes in day 1 or anything. Probably some sort of Enchantress deck, if I had to guess. But still, you know, maybe whether it's black-white or green-white or Abzan or something, there is an Enchantress deck out there. And I think this will almost certainly feature as a very important piece in it. Now, of course, Archon is another card that you could say might not be a sleeper. A lot of people talking about this, but again, it's under $1 right now, so I'm not really sure how many people are taking it seriously. The same thing is true of our number 1 card, a card that people are talking about, but is still well under $1, so are people taking it seriously as a force in the next standard? Because honestly, if I had my way, which I'm often glad that I don't, but if I had my way, this card wouldn't be 85 cents right now. It would be one of the chase rares in the set. That's enigmatic incarnation. Pretend I didn't have to look at my notebook. Seriously. Incarnation. I'm very bad at remembering the name of cards. I can remember the text box, but not the name. But anyway, enigmatic incarnation looks kind of like maybe one of the best cards in the entire set. To me. Right? First of all, unlike things like Neoform or Prime Speaker Vannifar, you don't have to sacrifice a creature. So you're not really giving up that much board presence, right? Like, you're not giving up board presence in terms of, like, you know, power and toughness, whether or not you're going to be attacked into, you know, how good you are at attacking into your opponent. You're not sacrificing any of those things when you sacrifice an enchantment, for the most part at least. I don't get it. It's such a stupid card. You know, if you just play a 2 or 3 drop enchantment, then you can go tutor up any 3 or 4 drop the turn this comes into play. I mean, you have to wait till your end step, but it's still pretty disgusting considering this does provide value for you the turn it enters the battlefield, and you don't have to sacrifice creatures to it. You know, stuff like Neoform, Prime Speaker Vannifar, they always want you to sacrifice power and toughness off the table so you can go get some more power and toughness. This, yeah, you can sacrifice an enchantment creature, but you can also sacrifice a regular enchantment that's not actually adding to your real board presence at all, and go get something ridiculous that immediately swings the game in your favor. Plus, you know, on the next turn, let's say you play, you know, a 5-cost enchantment. Well, suddenly you can sacrifice that. Hopefully you got some value off of it when you played it. Sacrifice that and go get a 6-drop creature, and there are all manner of 6-drop things that you might want to go get to completely just rip out your opponent's throat in this format right now. But even if you're just sacrificing like 2 and 3 cost enchantments to go get 3 and 4 drops, I can definitely see this being a really problematic card that effectively amounts to a free tutor every single turn. And again, you don't really have to go down on board presence too much. Plus, combined with enchantments that can come back from the graveyard, or enchantments that do stuff when they do go to the graveyard, or maybe cards that trigger when enchantments go to the graveyard. We saw a few of those in Theros Beyond Death. This can just do so much, and there's so many different like synergistic branches you can go down on the tree that is this card. So I really, really like Enigmatic Incarnation, and I again am surprised that even though it's seeing a fair amount of conversation, I don't think those conversations are necessarily trending towards this is a busted card, and maybe they should, because this is kind of a busted card. But anyway, that's all I got for this one. Let me know how you felt about it and any sleepers that I might have missed. But do keep in mind that we're going to do the top 25 or maybe top 30 Theros Beyond Death cards in the next day or two here on the channel. So if I didn't point out a card that you think is sleeping, it may have actually ended up on the main list. But still, call me out. Let me know how you felt about the list down there in the comments section. And of course, do all the other stuff I've already told you to do. Like, subscribe, hit the Patreon. And of course, if you wanted to pre-order any of these cards at the prices listed in the video, hit the first link in the description. Go over to TCG Player, pick up any of these pieces that you need, or just order sealed product because they've still got boxes at less than what MSRP would be if MSRP still existed to Wizards of the Coast. But still, that's a whole other bag of hammers. But in any case, do all the YouTube stuff. It helps me out more than you can possibly imagine. And of course, hit the link in the description to go to Patreon or follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev. So, is that it? That's all, right? I think so. Just let me know how you felt. Any sleepers that I've missed, especially like any really juicy, like common or uncommon level stuff that literally no one is talking about that you think is under the radar right now. I'm really interested in that. So make sure you comment, and I will catch you cats later. I'm Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.